Food is a very easy way to really, really take care of your mental fitness. And if it's one thing you take away from this today, you may not have a diagnosis, you may not even be feeling badly or anxious, but even if you're not, you can fortify your mental health with food just by eating healthier, absorbing these habits. This is not about judging you. This is not about making you feel bad if you had a piece of chocolate cake last night. It's really about what you can do to empower yourself. Food is within your control. It's at the end of your fork.
What's up, guys, and welcome to the Tap In Within podcast. On today's digestible episode, we had the opportunity to sit down with a powerhouse in the world of mental health. She's a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, professional chef, and nutritional specialist. Her niche work is in nutritional psychiatry, and she's regarded both nationally and internationally as a medical pioneer in this new and emerging field. She was considered Harvard's food mood expert and has been featured in outlets such as NBC, Goop, and the Wall Street Journal. Michelin-starred David Bouley described her as the world's first triple threat in the food as medicine space. Dr. Naidoo has been asked by the American Psychiatry Association to author the world's first academic text in nutritional psychiatry, and she's the author of the critically acclaimed book, This Is Your Brain on Food. Today's episode covers everything you need to know about boosting your mental well-being through what you feed your body. We also talk about the relationship between our gut and our brain, how to stray away from added sugars, foods that worsen anxiety, why we get cravings, and much more. So enjoy this gem, and we invite you to subscribe to this channel to keep getting wisdom from world leaders and paradigm shifters to level up your reality. So without further ado, we welcome the woman that knows how to make a kick-ass recipe to get you out of your worst mental state, Dr. Naidoo. Dr. Naidoo, how are you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So your work is probably the most unique set of intersection that I've seen in a while, like psychiatry, you're a professional chef, you studied nutrition, and now you're literally the pioneer in this new movement of nutritional psychiatry and seeing how our food affects our mental health, our mood, and other aspects of our emotional life as well. So I wanted to get started with you asking, I know you got into this space because you have a background in your family of chefs and cooks and Ayurvedic food, medicine, all of this. And when you went to Boston to study psychiatry, you didn't know how to cook necessarily. And I think that's something that happens to a lot of us in college. We get there and it's like, they've been cooking for me my whole life. My family has been helping me. Now, what do I do? So I wanted to get started in that. Dr. when she was just starting in Boston, how did you start picking up that you needed the tools to cook, and what led you down that path to fall in love with food and fall in love with cooking?
Sure, that's a good question. So I think I fell in love with food as a child when I was surrounded by a lot of medical doctors in the family, Ayurvedic practitioners, as you said, and just a lot of food and nurturance and love that in an extended Indian family where, as a child or even growing up, I wasn't expected to do very much except sit around, help a little bit, but really not cook or prepare. So I learned to bake. And so the joke was, later on in my life was, if I ever got married, her husband will love on cake. And that was a running joke in the family because I really couldn't cook. But what I found was that cooking was a connection to my family. It was a connection to those, to the love, the nurturance, the use of spices, understanding the health benefits of spices, understanding the medical benefits of eating healthy. And I don't want to misspeak, but not all our meals growing up were healthy or anything like that, but it's more that we had that in what we spoke about, and it was part of the conversation. The connection for me, though, was the mindfulness and creativity that I found in food. That unlike my friends who were studying, my colleagues, who were not looking forward to whatever meal they had to prepare, I would actually look forward to it. I would look forward to finding out new things in the supermarket, finding out more recipes from my mom, getting emails from her or messages just to guide me around that. And as I guess the most important thing I would say about it is I paid attention to it. I didn't just do it and move on. I was mindful about it. And I thought, wow, this is really fun. I'm going to do more. And it grew from there, so maybe one day you have a friend over for dinner. Then the next time you have two friends. But most importantly, I think doing things that you love and understanding that food is a part of what we do every day. It's important. It's a basic need we have. And paying attention to it becomes very important because as I then later understood the linkage to mental health in my profession and all of the different things that I did, it became even more powerful for me. But initially, I was following something that I loved to do.
Yeah.
And I think that was an important takeaway for people.
That's amazing. Yeah. And for me personally, when I first got into college, and I think a lot of this happens, you mentioned a couple of case studies in your book, that a lot of college students come and of course they're binging on alcohol, they're sleeping less, they're having the Western diet, the standard American diet.
Yeah.
And for me, I started noticing how that was affecting my mental clarity. And so I started to, for example, my breakfast was a croissant, a chocolate croissant, and then a coffee with sugar on it. Like right now it's saying that it's like cringe, but for me, it was basically, and I was lucky because I was living in a dorm the first year of college, and we had the kitchen there, and it was not the best food. I wasn't very picky back then, but it wasn't the best food. But when I moved out of that dorm in the second year, one of my roommates had a passion for cooking, had an absolute, and he is literally gonna be a chef. I told him, you need to drop out of business degree, you need to be a chef, bro. And I started cooking with him, and I started observing what he was doing, and I liked how he was mixing different, and he was very creative in the kitchen. So I liked how you mentioned that creativity. And for me, it was that journey of understanding that when I started eating better, everything around me started to change. My body physically changed, my energy levels, and everything else, my mental clarity shifted. So as a psychiatrist, how did you start relating food to all these depression, anxiety, PTSD? Because I know that right now it's not a very common thing to talk about in the psychiatry field, although
Absolutely.
that you are leading it. So you are showing and shedding that voice to that field. But how did you first make that connection, really?
So, I think there are two parts to my answer. One is that I think that what led me into the field of psychiatry is I always had observational skills that I paid attention to. Because as a psychiatrist, you do have to observe, you do have to introspect, you do have to interact with other humans in a certain way to be the most useful. So I always sort of feel I had that as a tool, and I always noticed how food made me feel or how it made a family member feel. But I also recognized in medical school that people were not talking about that. And it stuck in my head, that we don't talk about these things. And it remained there. But where I think it came together for me was a very seminal moment when I was very early on in studying. And I was learning about psychotropic medications, and part of the way that you learn in residency is you see your own patients. And the patient came in and yelled at me. And, I'd seen him, I think, 2 weeks before, and started a medication because he was, in fact, having symptoms that needed a medication. And he came in claiming that I had caused him to gain weight. I know from looking at the medical chart that wasn't the case because I had all of his data in front of me. But I was young, new to this, not as experienced as I might be now. And it was a little bit startling that he came in and I didn't want to upset my patients. And, of course you mature and you realize that the things change. Mm-hmm. But in the moment that he was standing in front of me and he was yelling, or I should say raising his voice, I looked at what he had in his hand. He was sitting in my office and he had this very large cup. Now, if you've ever been to Boston or, parts of Jamaica, Dunkin' Donuts is one of the favorite coffees. Yeah. And it is very favorite in Boston. And it was a very large cup. And I looked at it and it occurred to me, I said, oh, let's call him Jim. I said, Jim, by the way, what did you put in your coffee today? And part of it was distracting him, but also something did occur to me. I was like, well, that's a really large cup of coffee. And coffee on its own, I talk about this in the book. It's not something I demonize. I think a certain amount of coffee is fine unless you have symptoms. And he said, oh, well, I did this and I did that. And then I immediately opened up the computer and I said, well, let's just break that down. You put more than a quarter cup of the creamer, right? And then you put how many packets of sugar? And then I explained to him how many teaspoons of sugar were in the number of packets. And it ended up being like 8 teaspoons of sugar and more than a quarter cup of creamer, right? Wow. So of the 20-ounce cup, I was able to say to him, look, of that cup, this amount is creamer, technically this number of teaspoons of sugar. And there was something that when he looked at me, I could see that a penny dropped for him. And that was a very powerful moment because the ability to connect a fact or an understanding of an action with a lifestyle change was very powerful. He didn't have to give up coffee. He just had to rethink how he was having his coffee. And it made him realize that and by the way, I really don't believe in counting calories, but in that moment, I was able to calculate for him what was actually contributing, especially the sugar and the processed nature of the creamer, was contributing to his weight in one single habit that he had. And he would have more than one of those a day. So that was very powerful. And it really made me think, if I can impact small habit changes in someone who came in yelling at me, then I could be onto something that would potentially help others if they understood there are small things that they can tweak. It doesn't have to be changing 10 habits at one time or 10 things you're doing around food at one time. And for me, that really was the change. And from there, it grew. It grew as an interest. It grew as a passion. It grew to me reading more, studying more, putting facts together. So it remained in my consciousness, so to speak, because I felt it was powerful.
Yeah. So in this example, it was like seeing how small changes in the lifestyle of a client was able to make things better in general, and that was cutting out sugar, or what else?
It was two things, and he was being treated for depression, and it also led me down the path of understanding and reading more about what different ingredients do to the brain. Sugar, we always understand in relation to type 2 diabetes now, diabetes and all sorts of things, but it also impacts mental health. So the powerful thing was the fact that he connected it. He wanted to change because something clicked for him, that those actions were causing this change. And he had the power to adjust that. He could use less sugar. He could not have sugar. He could have less coffee, or he could put something else in his coffee. All of those things were small, but large in the bigger spectrum of his life, because they would help him lose weight. They would help him feel better. The sugar wouldn't be driving his depression, and that type of stuff. So those were the different connections that happened in that moment. But then it sort of led me to want to explore this further.
And another connection that you talk a lot about, which is really the core of what you're doing, is the connection between the brain and the gut, the romance that those two have together. And I think intuitively, we all know that something in our gut affects how we think, because we might get this feeling in the stomach if we're nervous or whatever, or if we smell something, a food, and then we remember and directly connect to that brain. But I wanted to get into maybe how you explain it scientifically, and what were the what is the history behind what we know about the gut and brain, and why it's such a new emerging thing in the medical field?
Sure. It's interesting because Hippocrates had spoken about this connection all those years ago. And so he was onto something.
Yeah.
And I think that what we've known or learned in the past 2 decades or so is really this burgeoning amount of information that has come out about the gut microbiome and the microbes that actually reside in the gut. And the connection for me starts here. I think it's helpful for people to understand that the gut and brain come from the same cells when the embryo is developing, in the fetus, in other words. So it's important to know that they arise from the same cells. So even though they end up far apart in the body, they have the same origin, but then they're connected throughout life by the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve, which connects them anatomically, but then biochemically, physiologically, or has this sort of two-way superhighway of chemical messages that are bidirectional and that work all the time. So when people understand that, they start to make the connection more. And then understanding that the serotonin, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like SSRIs, Prozac, Zoloft, Celexa, and others, those are all the brand names, are used to treat many conditions, but that more than 90% of the serotonin receptors on the gut is important for people to understand. And, in these times of the pandemic, a very huge component of the immune system is in the gut. So the gut becomes a very powerful organ that we no longer just see as, just where our food gets digested. It actually has implications for immunity, mental well-being, autoimmune disease, and so many more things. One of the things that impacts the gut microbiome and the gut-brain axis is food. So does stress, so do many other things, but food is one of those things. And helping people understand that becomes important because there's ongoing research. It's a newer area. It's certainly taken off. But I think where it becomes powerful in mental health, that people understand and pay attention to how they feel after they've eaten something. And if they change their diet, if they tweak their diet, do they feel differently? It becomes powerful in that way. And then in the book, I outline both the animal research and the human studies that we have around the gut microbiome over time, and more, of course, are going on.
That's amazing. And I've heard the Dr. Zach Bush talk a lot about the microbiome as well. And it fascinates me because you start realizing that we might be more bacteria than human. Yes,
exactly. So, some people describe it as that. We actually there's so many trillions of microbes. One type is bacteria in the microbiome that it actually exceeds the number of human cells in our bodies, which is fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So
yeah, and it's also realizing that there's good bacteria, bad bacteria, and then they're all affected by what food you're putting in. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe we can get into what are the most important foods that give rise to the good bacteria in our body and boost our immunity and give us these positive mental health benefits.
Sure. So I think it's also helpful to understand that the food is one of the things that affects the microbiome as well as many other things. And in mental health, one of the things that also affects the gut microbiome is stress. Our stress levels affect that too. But in terms of food, when we have to, I like to think of the microbiome or share this with clients and explain it to them in this way. It's almost like you have a guest in your home. And, you can decide you're going to treat that guest well, give them nice, and this, I guess, is before times of COVID, but let's just pretend hypothetically you have a guest.
Social distancing.
Exactly. But, when they come to your home and maybe they're staying over and you think, well, you'll put some clean linen on their bed, or you'll, make sure they have a nice place to sleep if they're staying over with you. Well, the gut microbiome is part of us. It's actually, it technically isn't, it's not at all a guest in our body, but think of it that way because we have to take care of it. It's up to us. And one way we can do that is through our food. So if we are doing simple things like having enough fiber in our diet, fiber comes from fruit, vegetables, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, healthy whole grains. We actually are feeding them what they need. If we are hydrating well, we are keeping our metabolism going because we are drinking enough things like healthy water, which keeps us sustained. If we are eating foods that are rich in prebiotics are things like jicama, asparagus, oats, certain things like that, which actually, again, feed those bugs in the gut. Then we can get probiotics as a supplement or fermented foods. And, things like yogurt, things like kimchi, miso, tempeh, so many others all bring back good active bacteria to the gut. So we feeding them, we're bringing back more of the good microbes. And then, just improving our sort of vegetable servings. In the US, only 1 in 10 Americans eats enough vegetables at this point that we know from research. So we're definitely behind the 8 ball on that. And including greens, leafy greens. So the rich folate, as well as the other nutrients from leafy greens actually help to not only improve mood, they lower anxiety. So it's including these types of foods, eating the color of the rainbow, including leafy greens, eating your vegetables, the sources of fiber, pre and probiotics are a good way to get started. And I also like, when I talk about that, to throw in the micronutrients and macronutrients. So some of them are the vitamins, but you can get those vitamins in food, but you can also include spices, because spices are a great way. Turmeric with a pinch of black pepper, saffron, both those spices have actually been shown to improve symptoms of depression. So, there are easy things that we can start to do in our dietary changes. And all of the things I mentioned, you don't have to do in one day. You can just choose one of those habits and build from there. So maybe it's starting to eat a plain yogurt with berries and cinnamon because of the rich probiotics. And now in the US, they have both dairy and non-dairy. So if someone is vegan, they can get a plant-based coconut yogurt as well.
So Dr. Uma, what I really like about your book is that you separate each chapter with a different mental health illness. You start off with depression, you start off with anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder, you even end with libido issues, things like this. And there's something in it for everybody. But then you start realizing as you read the chapters that there's some patterns and there's certain foods that have multiple benefits. What are the patterns that you've seen in the research of specific foods that actually help a lot of these different illnesses and don't just treat one and cover a range?
Absolutely. There's definitely some overlap. And the way to think about the book is that you don't, number one, have to have a diagnosis to use the book, because it will help your mental fitness either way if you start to make these changes. The second is a certain chapter may appeal to you, and you may start there and start reading that chapter first. The third thing is that you may know a friend, a family member, even a coworker who could benefit, and you could help them out, because the book is really intended to be a guide to help you through. So excellent point that you made, because there's overlap with certain things like anti-inflammatory foods. These are rich, colorful, colors of the rainbows foods that are rich in polyphenols, rich antioxidants, good for the gut and good for the brain. There are omega-3 fatty acids, which can be found in fatty fish like salmon, but they can also have plant-based sources like chia seeds, flax seeds, walnuts, which have the short-chain omega-3s, which are also good for you. And so there are those. But also there are certain things like vitamin D. Vitamin D actually can be gotten from food, from fortified milks, but it helps mood. So there's one right there. And then, I think immunity boosting foods become important in this time that we're in. So citrus fruit, red bell peppers have one of the highest levels of vitamin C. Vitamin C is great for immunity. We know the immune system, a very large component is in the gut. So taking care of the immune system is also taking care of that gut environment that we're talking about. So those are just a few. There's several more in the book, but there are some themes like omega-3 fatty acids. Good fats like olive oil have anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties that help in different conditions. And then spices are the other one that show up in a few different places, and sometimes they're different spices. Like the spices that may help brain fog may be different from the ones that are better for depression or anxiety. But each chapter has a list of foods to embrace and foods to avoid. The foods to embrace are much longer than the foods to avoid, because I'm all about giving you more options to eat than fewer. And I don't like to exclude foods unless some of the science indicates that maybe you should be a little concerned if you have, say, an uptick of your anxiety. Things like gluten, I don't necessarily think you have to exclude gluten unless you have celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. But some studies have shown that it worsens anxiety. So you might want to consider taking away gluten for a week from your diet, eliminating for a week or two, and seeing if that changes. But you don't have to give up foods necessarily. It's just I'm trying to indicate there are patterns that you may want to pay attention to.
Yeah. And I really like that at the end of each chapter, there's like a cheat sheet. So it makes it very digestible for people. No pun intended. But I wanted
That's true. You can quickly go to that, if you're interested in the condition, and start that way to use the book, and then go into what you're interested in, what you want to read, and realize, that there's all the references at the end of the book that you can look at too as well, if you're interested in the science behind it.
Yeah. And you posted recently, today, I think it was, about the concept of the comfort foods. And that's something I wanted to cover with you, because as college students, we rely on these comfort foods because maybe we're running low on energy, or it's just the easiest, fastest way to, get some calories in and get a little bit of energy. Yeah. And it's very short-lived. But I wanted to ask you, because you wanted to redefine these comfort foods. They're not necessarily comforting. So what are your thoughts on comfort foods, and what can we do to maybe stray away or wean off a bit of these foods?
Sure. Well, the first thing we need to understand is it's a big transition to move away from home into your own place, your own space. Maybe it's a dorm, a shared space, and to suddenly have to, maybe you didn't cook early on in your life like me, or maybe you did. But either way, it's a big transition. And when this times of pandemic, that may be some sort of hybrid situation you're in. So the first thing is, I think, be patient with yourself and understand that it's not necessarily the easiest transition, but you want to try to make a success of it over time. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is understanding that when we are eating foods, whether they're good options or not so good options, they start to impact our gut microbes and our gut microbiome in 24 hours. So if you continue on the fast food diet and junk food and processed foods and packaged foods, then over time, those, besides the weight and other consequences of your health, because metabolic health is also super important in this, then your gut microbiome starts to change. And if ultimately you're going down the path of inflammation in the gut, which could lead to consequences like leaky gut and other conditions. So I think having that awareness is also important. The third thing is that comfort foods are foods that are like fast foods and that are processed, are made to be hyperpalatable. They're engineered a certain way. And so our body, our brain, our body gets used to it. So take added sugars, for example. We know from research that the added sugars work on the same pathways in the reward system in the brain as includes dopamine, the neurotransmitter, but the same reward system as cocaine. Yeah. So when you have that sugary treat, your body and your brain is going to want more. Now, I think that people who are interested in this topic should definitely perhaps look at that article. It's really available on my Instagram. But the connections that we want to take from that is not to feel badly about what we're doing. If we are eating junk food every day, is to think, what can I do differently? Well, here are some simple things. You can start to have dairy or non-dairy plain yogurt with fresh berries or frozen berries and some cinnamon just to start your breakfast. You don't have to cook it if you don't have a stove. You can start to eat a healthier option. If you at least have a small fridge, you can make a 2 or 3 ingredient chia pudding for breakfast. Mm. Why do I say it?
It's so easy to make. It's so easy.
It's super easy to make, right?
Yeah.
And you can top it with berries. Again, it could be frozen. You can top it with healthy nuts, seeds, all of the seeds that have added plant-based omega-3s, great for you, great for your body and brain. So things that you can literally do in a dorm room that you don't have to cook, but maybe you need a small fridge to do it. Just so that there's something you can eat, whether it's a snack, whether it's that you're feeling hungry. Then a third thing is you can keep if you have access to a kitchen, make a really simple homemade granola with healthy ingredients, much less sugar. I use a little bit of honey in mine, but I use a little bit of honey for a whole tray of granola. So whatever you're eating, it's not going to have a ton, but it just gives a lightly sweetened taste. And I use other things for sweetness, such as a touch of vanilla, and things like that, and spices like cinnamon. So there's something, if you have access, you can bake a batch and keep it in a sealed jar. That's a great crunchy snack for you. Okay. Another snack you don't have to cook is healthy nuts. Just raw, natural nuts. Keep them in a jar. They're best kept in the fridge, but a handful, which is about a quarter cup, great snack to keep your brain going, keep your energy going. Fruit, an apple actually provides energy. A few nuts and an apple, a good thing to keep in your room, keep on hand, or if you have a store that you can, or supermarket to buy those, buy some of those. So it's about almost rethinking, because if say you don't have anything in your dorm room at all and you're hungry, it's very easy to get on your phone and order takeout. Yeah. It's easy for any one of us. So it's about being prepared.
Nowadays, we have Uber Eats, we have all these different apps that the food just comes and we don't have to even move, You
don't have to move. So it's super convenient, right? So we have to find ways that we can actually beat the system for ourselves. And in some ways, we are also trying to work with our brain, because if you have a tub of ice cream in your fridge, or if you have a ton of potato chips or pretzels and sort of unhealthy processed junk foods in your room, do you think that it's easy for your brain not to want to eat those? It's very hard for your brain to say, oh, let me go out and, have a salad. Your brain is going to see the potato chips and it's going to want that. So there's a way in which, in that article, I sort of outlined how what's comforting actually is not great because of what it does to insulin in our body and the glucose levels, etc. So we want to be mindful. We want to have options, and we want to plan ahead. Making a supermarket run every week and just stocking up on some healthy things you don't have to cook. Now, if you have access to a kitchen, then that again, find a day, half a day or a few hours a week, when you do some meal prep and, prepare some things ahead of time. I like to tell college students about my little, that's a recipe you can easily find on the internet for little mini frittatas. You bake in the oven in a cupcake pan. You freeze them and you have another healthy snack or even a good breakfast. Things like that, or a single sheet pan meal. On a single sheet pan, put your protein. It could be plant-based like tofu. It could be a piece of chicken or salmon, and put all of your veggies in the same pan and bake it at one time. Yeah. Less cleanup, convenient. You could probably make 2 or 3 meals on the same pan. Just put some of it away in a sealed, clean container, and you can prep ahead. Like that.
Yeah. And one thing that sparked a question was going back to what you just mentioned about the brain making this decision. And I wanted to ask you about cravings, because I've heard before that really sometimes the decisions that we make from our food aren't necessarily our free will, but our gut bacteria asking for these foods because we've fed them for so long that it's so used to it. And I think that was a huge paradigm shift for me, especially knowing that, like, if I have this thought of, ooh, I need right now a chocolate cake or whatever, or a croissant, maybe that's not me consciously making that decision, but because I've created this environment in my gut that thrives on this food, and it creates more bad, quote unquote, bad bacteria. That's why I'm making this decision. So maybe I wanted to ask you, what is your take on these cravings, where they come from, and how can we have a different perspective on these decisions?
Sure. So, cravings can be complicated, and remember that whether it's our gut or our brain, it's a whole system, right? It's a whole system that we're interacting with. The thing I would say about cravings is that there's a way to think about it from the environment, and there's a way to think about it in terms of mindfulness. In terms of environment, we just covered, it's what you have in your room. It's what you have available in your dorm or whatever your living situation is. And I would say that if it has more unhealthy foods, that you maybe just want to start replacing those slowly and over time. Crunchy celery sticks and hummus, snacks that are easy to keep and you don't have to really cook. But, emotionally and physiologically and neurochemically, cravings are complicated because they are driven by, we eat a certain food, then we want more of it. So there is that cycle that gets set up. And how do we break the cycle? We kind of have to be mindful, sort of step back from that habit, realize that it's happening, realize that eating more of that food is not helping us, and start to replace it. So maybe you are a potato chip fan. Or pretzel fan, then making a crunchy, simple, 2-ingredient, crunchy spinach chip in the oven is something that will give you crunch, give you nutrients from something like spinach or kale, and maybe a little bit of salt and pepper, a drizzle of avocado oil. Takes 20 minutes to make, and it replaces that craving because you're still having something crunchy. You want it to be tasty. I do care that it's tasty. Spices can help that without any calories, and in fact, probably a lot of good benefits. And then, you get your body slowly used to those better options for you, and something starts to change. I've had patients who have said, I eat a candy bar every day, and I've introduced them to slow and steady amounts of really extra dark, more than 80% dark chocolate, pure form, natural raw dark chocolate without added sugar. But when they actually like the taste, it's super good for their brain. I know what it sounds like, but when you get used to it, the people love it, and then they have like a quarter piece, a little square of chocolate, and they move on. They no longer want that, 1-2 candy bars or packet of candy that they've been eating. So,
I love that. And one of the other things that you cover a lot in the book is the relationship between the amygdala in our brain and then like anxiety. And anxiety is probably one of the most prevalent things that my generation faces, just because of the overstimulation of information, a lot of different factors. We know there's an anxiety crisis in Generation Z and the younger generations. So how would you relate the effect of that on the amygdala, and what are some really actionable steps to start reducing anxiety through our food, through our what we're eating and putting into our body?
Sure. There are many ways to think about anxiety, but for now, I'll focus on the food. And I think it's a great question. I think one of the biggest things for us to know is the foods that worsen anxiety, because there may be things in our environment, in our snacks, in our habits that are worsening it. And so let's break that down. The added and refined sugars. If you're eating cereal for breakfast, if you're having oatmeal, but it comes in a package that has added sugars and dried fruits in it, or dried frozen berries or whatever it is that the mixes sometimes come with. Unfortunately, it's not that each ingredient is unhealthy. It is that they usually add a lot of sugar when they process it. So not the best thing. So added and refined sugars in savory foods, ketchup, salad dressings that you don't realize, fruited yogurts that you don't realize, important to know. Processed vegetable oils are less expensive and are often used by restaurants, but mostly a lot of fast food restaurants because they're inexpensive. Those actually worsen your symptoms of anxiety. So eating that diet doesn't help you because it's another ingredient you don't even realize is there that's worsening things for you. Processed and ultra-processed foods with stabilizers, colorants, dyes, all of that drives anxiety. Trans fats in foods has been associated with behavioral aggression. So, not the best option for us from that perspective. And another one that people don't realize is artificial sweeteners. So someone may say, well, I'm going to give up that soda that I'm drinking. I'll have the diet version, but the artificial sweetener could be worsening your anxiety. So even just right now thinking about how many things that I'm eating, I may not realize maybe worsening my anxiety. Even that could become just important, to understand.
Yeah.
And then, like I mentioned in that article on comfort foods, when we're eating simple carbohydrates versus more complex carbohydrates, the simple ones like a sugary donut, those break down really fast. You get a spike in your insulin. And, when compared to when you eat a very wholesome, more complex meal, lots of vegetables, some protein, some fiber, all of those things, then, there aren't these sudden spikes and you really feel more satiated and on an even keel for longer time. So even those things become really important in thinking about our anxiety.
Yeah. And I really wanted to ask you, because we've had the opportunity to have on the podcast Darren O'Lean, superfood expert, another one, David Avocado Wolf. He was on the podcast.
Awesome.
And they talk a lot about these superfoods.
Yep.
And I wanted to ask you a little about what your thoughts on these superfoods, or which ones have you found, or is there a need to consume superfoods if we can get them elsewhere, the nutrients that we're looking for? What are your thoughts on this?
So I think there's a place for superfoods depending on what it is. But I also think that where we can start right now today is just by improving. Any one of us, including myself, can up our game in terms of our diet. And what I mean by that is just make some healthy tweaks to improve what we're doing. And yes, you can fill the gaps in your nutrition with a supplement or a vitamin, but start with food first and start to correct it there. If you have access to a superfood or few, why not include them in? There's no harm in that. But also just make sure that you're following those basic principles of a healthy, wholesome diet, eating lots of colors of the rainbow, which bring back fiber, antioxidants, and polyphenols to your gut and your brain. But are also really good for us. Leafy greens, the things we mentioned right at the beginning, prebiotic, probiotic, some basic principles, which I call sort of the pillars of nutritional psychiatry that we want you to include in your diet, and whichever forms of protein as well that you have. So those things, I would say, have access to superfoods, throw them in, add them in, great for you. But, also make sure you're doing some basic steps, with your diet so that you're getting in the basic nutrients you need to.
Amazing. And one last experiment that I wanted to do is, in your book, you mentioned a case study of a patient that she was having some problems with her memory, and she was having exams coming up, and we know that food can really boost our memory, our focus, our retention of information, affecting our working memory, our long-term memory. So in a hypothetical, let's say that I'm preparing for some final exams in a couple weeks. What recipe or what type of foods should I start including in my diet so I can be very sharp when I'm taking that exam, so I can remember what I'm studying? Because if we're eating the wrong foods, we might just forget everything. And when we're there taking the exam, it's not going to help.
Sure. So I think start with, you said you haven't tried the recipes yet, but start with some simple recipes from the book. Firstly, there's a whole chapter on recipes, and the recipes match the different, and you can mix them up and use them however you like, but they match the chapters. So there are recipes that go with the cognition chapter. I would say Include those sheet pan meals with lots of vegetables and fiber in your diet. Make sure you use the spice turmeric with a pinch of black pepper. The piperine in black pepper actually activates the curcumin in turmeric to make it more bioactive to your brain. So make sure you include that. If you don't cook, add a quarter teaspoon of turmeric with a pinch of black pepper to a soup, a smoothie, or even a tea. You can do that easily. So I would add in spices. I would make sure you have plenty of vegetables, some healthy fruit, lower glycemic fruit or berries. Have those in your diet. Add in those healthy fats from nuts and seeds. And so, you're building up a list of foods that a lot of them are just healthy foods to start, but there are nutrients in those that become important for your brain, for your focus. I know that, for example, for brain fog, there's an antioxidant called luteolin, and you can get a luteolin in things like mint, and you can make a fresh mint tea to kind of, just clear your thinking. A green tea has an antioxidant, EGCG. It's a great pep up in the afternoon, helps you focus, gives you a little bit of energy. But remember, some of the forms of green tea also have caffeine, so just be careful of that if you're trying to get to bed at a certain time. But it's a way to, have coffee in the morning and switch to some green tea in the afternoon to help focus. Those are some things I would start. And remember hydration. Always drink enough water.
Drink enough water. Yes, that's 100%.
Get up and walk around when you're studying. Do some exercise. Do some mindfulness. Do some meditations. All of those things help because it's all part of the system, right? That helps us.
And the whole body is connected, which is not something that the medical field has yet to be public about. It's everything.
Medical cadence should be a bit siloed. So
yeah, that's amazing. And I think we've taken so much out of this conversation, a lot of actionable steps. I wanted to start wrapping up. I know we're coming on against the hour. And first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge all of the work that you've done. Thank you. Years of study. I mean, I'm looking at the resume. It's Harvard, Cambridge, like all these amazing universities, years of work, years of study. And thank you for being a voice in this space and being a leader.
Thank you.
And I wanted to leave people with where they can find you, first and foremost, where they can know more about you, read your articles. I know you're posting on different outlets, but where can people find your work more easily?
Sure. So I have a website where you can subscribe. It's umanaidoomd.com. Also links to the book if you want to purchase it there, if you're interested. Depending on where you are in the world, it's either called This Is Your Brain on Food. The same book is called, actually, let me show you. Some parts of the world, it's called The Food Mood Connection.
Okay.
Exact same book in other parts of the world. In the US, it is actually, and US and Canada, it's This Is Your Brain on Food. And you can link to the website and get it there, or get it on Amazon and your local bookseller. But also following me on social media, where I try to do updates all the time. We always link a research article with anything we post. So you can always look or read that if you want to, look at where we are getting the information from, because I feel like people need well-vetted sources of information, especially in mental wellness, with there being a mental health crisis right now during the pandemic. And I think that we try to make the posts just things that you can take some quick take-home points. They're not medical advice. They're just guidelines around food, and things that you can include in your diet. And my social handle is at DrUmanaidoo at Dr. Uma Naidoo. Follow us there. Interact with us. We love hearing from people.
For sure. And Dr. Uma is always going on IG Lives with amazing leaders and experts in industry, just paradigm shifters. I wanted to get into some of the wrap-up questions that we have related to this podcast. Much of the core of this has been to communicate the need to go within and tap in within. So one of the questions that we have for all our guests in the end is to ask, where, like in the morning, when you first get up, what is that one thing that gets you up or ignites that flame within that we have? We've also called it the energy. One definition for the energy is the untapped sources of internal energy that we all hold to unveil extraordinary mental, physical, emotional, spiritual capabilities. We wanted to know, what is that in your life?
It's a combination of the purpose, which in Hinduism we call dharma, and the joy that it brings me. So it's the fact that my body of work, I was fortunate enough to bring forward in this book, and I feel very humbled to have done that. And I'm grateful that people are interested in it. So when I get up in the morning, if I can do more of that, which brings me joy, that's very important to me, and it keeps me going. You know, if wonderful people like yourself want to hear more about it and want to help others of your age group eat healthier at college, I know that eating healthier will help your mental well-being. It will improve your mental fitness. You will do better at your exams. I know this. And if I can impart even a little bit of knowledge that helps that helps me get up in the morning. So it's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah. And I know you're inspiring a lot of people to really look at a new field of work, which is nutritional psychiatry. So if you're young, you're still trying to find out what you want to do in life, and you're interested in all these things, how food affect mental health, this is a field that you might want to get into. The final question we have is just getting to know your final remarks, your final nuggets of wisdom that you would leave our audience. Anything that you feel necessary or called to say to our audience, the younger generations, what would that be?
Food is a very easy way to really, really take care of your mental fitness. And if it's one thing you take away from this today, you may not have a diagnosis, you may not even be feeling badly or anxious, but even if you're not, you can fortify your mental health with food just by eating healthier, absorbing these habits. This is not about judging you. This is not about making you feel bad if you had a piece of chocolate cake last night. It's really about what you can do to empower yourself. Food is within your control. It's at the end of your fork, and you can do that for yourself. No prescription needed or anything, and you can help yourself that way. And of course, if that doesn't exclude the fact that if you're not feeling great and you need to see a doctor, need a prescription, you can still involve food in that. There's one thing, a few things that you take away from it. It's that message.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Uma. I really enjoyed this conversation from the heart.
Me too.
Thank you for giving us your time, your valuable time. I hope we can do this again sometime in the future. We'll stay tuned to see what is next for Dr. Uma, what she's going to be putting out. And I wish you all the best for the years to come, and in your work, keep being that light onto the tunnel.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. And I hope you stay in touch. Please follow what we're up to so that you know what we're doing, and stay in touch. I appreciate that.
Of course. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.